Thanks, Ronnie.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
bless you, man.
All right. Well, thank you, Ronnie, and thanks for letting me come back. There are a lot of things we told you that if you entrusted us with the privilege of serving in this position, we would do on our watch. I believe we are doing them. If we're not, it's not for lack of intent or lack of trying, and figure we ought to talk a little bit about them, and it gives you the ability then to offer some guidance going forward, not just Dave on an ongoing basis. So that's sort of the game plan over the next several minutes. Let me talk to you a little bit about several of the major areas we've been focused on. We received just over 25,000 applications for concealed carry permits in the last fiscal year. By comparison, the biggest year before that was the previous year, also on our watch, where we received about 12,000. If you add it all up in the 2.5 years we've had the privilege of serving, we have now handled about 2/3 of the total number of permits that have been applied for over the lifetime of this program. So I hope we are doing that efficiently and effectively in the customer service model. That's our direction to our folks. But that's a good example of something we've been assigned by law to do, and we're doing our darndest to, as I tell our folks, keep those stories out of the headlines because we're doing them well. We want folks focused on other policy decisions, not on how we're doing our job. The areas I wanted to focus on today are this. First of all, one of the things we said we would focus on if you trusted us to do this job was pushing back on the Obama agenda on areas of federal overreach where we think that the federal government is acting beyond the scope of its constitutional authority. There was a very nice piece recently in the Weekly Standard by Fred Barnes. I think The Last Redoubt was the headline that he chose. And he talks about Republican attorneys general being the last line of defense against some areas of federal overreach. So you all are well aware we became involved on our watch among the group of states challenging the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. I call that the first generation litigation. You know, the shorthand on that you heard in a lot of the mainstream press was that we lost, and certainly we were hoping that we wanted to win everything. We wanted the grand slam home run. But the reality is we won a lot in that litigation, not everything we had sought, but a lot. Certainly there's going to be very good precedential value in terms of limits that the Supreme Court has now identified, really for the first time since the New Deal, on the boundaries of the Commerce Clause to grant authority to the federal government to do whatever it pleases. That's going to pay dividends over time. And in a much more practical and concrete sense, our friends in Topeka and the legislature and the governor have been wrestling over the past year with whether or not to expand eligibility for the Kansas Medicaid program. And the reason they were able to have that discussion in Topeka is we won that part of our litigation in Washington. At the end of the day, we were successful by a vote of 7-2 on the Supreme Court in transforming from a federal mandate with which we had no discretion to a state-by-state choice where it's people elected by people in this room in Topeka, not in Washington. We sued EPA. Challenging their authority to issue this so-called cross-state air pollution rule, one of that new basket of air quality regulations that, in our view at least, is simply an effort to substitute regulatory policy making for the Obama administration's inability to convince elected policymakers to enact cap and trade. Well, we can't get Congress to do it, we'll go over here and do it by regulation. And we think that's the big picture on what's going on. So far, every judge that's heard our cause on the so-called Casper rule has agreed with us. We won in front of the panel. We won in front of the full D.C. Court of Appeals. The U.S. Supreme Court has now agreed to hear EPA's appeal on that. I'm not too alarmed by that because typically when a lower court declares a federal statute unconstitutional, even as applied, the Supreme Court is usually willing to step in and be the final arbiter. But we will have those arguments coming up sometime after the 1st of October. We'll see how that goes, but I'm very hopeful about it. We also have a number of cases pending where the legislature has elected to strengthen Kansas law with respect to abortion. We've been sued. The state has been sued on that a number of times. We're defending, I believe it's a total of 5 lawsuits. Actually, it's only 4 now. We actually won one. You don't see that a lot in the press, but the only one that's gone to final decision and is done and over, we won, which was the insurance rider provision. That is now law in Kansas, and it's beyond at least the initial legal challenge. We are the principal consumer protection litigators in every other county in the state. We're not the only ones. Wyandotte does their own sometimes, so does Douglas, but we're the principal ones in 103 counties. Because of that, we have a very robust capacity on consumer protection, and because of that, our terrific group of folks had a terrific year in calendar 2012. We recovered about $49 million $49 million on behalf of Kansas consumers and for the public treasury in our consumer work. To put that into context, not that it's a competition with the past, but to put that into context, the single biggest year of recoveries in any year prior to last year was in the teens in terms of numbers of millions. Likewise, our Medicaid fraud recoveries are looking very good and very healthy. I call this our taxpayer protection function. Our job, assigned by law, is to go out and bring back money that was paid out of the Treasury in the Medicaid program that shouldn't have been paid out in the first place. We are doing that. I think the numbers are going to show we recovered around $27 million last year, which is also a very healthy number. We have been able to stand up, we'll have it done by the end of this year, the first ever in the history of the state child victims unit at the KBI. So that those parts of the state, which frankly are pretty much everywhere except the KC metro area and Wichita, those parts of the state that do not have robust local capacity to investigate terrible crimes against children will now have the ability of specially trained investigators working hand in glove with KC metro folks and Wichita metro folks to be sure we have a statewide presence for those sorts of crimes.